The goal of this podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. And we do that every single week by sharing the stories and advice of those rocking it on the other side. And welcome back to Adjunct, the segment where we interview the best ad educators across the world at zero cost to your ears. It seems like every school Glenn Griffin touches turns into creative gold. Glenn Griffin is the director of Texas Creative at UT Austin. He runs their creative portfolio track there. He's been doing this. He's been teaching courses in creativity and portfolio development now for more than 20 years. And UT Austin is where he's at today. They're pretty legendary, I would say. They top a lot of rankings. They get a lot of press. And most importantly, they get a lot of students to break into advertising at big agencies, small agencies, diverse shops across the country without having to go to a portfolio school. In September of 2010, his first book, The Creative Process, illustrated how advertising's big ideas are born. He wrote that with Deborah Morrison at University of Oregon, was published. And his research has appeared in the Journal of Advertising Psychology and Marketing, the Journal of Interactive Advertising, and the Journal of Advertising Education, among other publications. He's also written for Campaign, UK Magazine, and How magazines. So he's got that academia side of publishing and the trade publications, where I read pretty much for a living and try to get features in. But what I loved about talking with Glenn was the role of undergrad institutions in preparing aspiring advertisers to break in and thrive in advertising properly. Properly, key word there. He's been foundational in the portfolio track systems at several undergraduate institutions, and they seem to be combating portfolio schools quite nicely. As he talks today on this podcast, you will come across some nuggets of break-in wisdom you will want to write down and come back to probably daily. I wish I had this episode when I was an undergrad. And you're going to want to dive deeper, and you can connect with him on LinkedIn. He's very receptive. We have that in the bio, his LinkedIn. And even more, if you want to better your break-in chances, you can check out the Crowbar Awards, our creative brief, where we basically create a new brief for you every couple months, get a new guest judge. They review the work. They pick the best winners. You can maybe even win a blue crowbar, which will get you a chance to come on the podcast, and we send you a physical crowbar so you can break into the industry. If you haven't checked those out, crowbarawards.com, www.crowbarawards.com. Now, on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. All right. Glenn Griffin, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, Adjunct Edition. How the heck are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And I mentioned this before, but you have been endorsed, recommended on this podcast so much. So there's a lot of hype around this. I'm excited for this conversation, and I hope the listeners are as well. From the intro, I'm sure I did a lot of hyping up beforehand. But Glenn, thanks for coming on. I'm excited for this conversation. You're all good today. You're in beautiful Austin, Texas, I'm assuming?
Yes, unseasonably warm, beautiful Austin, Texas, just the way I like it.
What's the weather right now?
It's 61 degrees and it's been a beautiful day. And
Not
having
bad for
having
summer.
relocated back here in July from Denver, it's a refreshing change.
Right. Because you've been here now around 8 months.
Right.
And you just left the University of Colorado Boulder. if I'm looking at your LinkedIn and that's up to date. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got it. And today we'll get into your career. You're the director of Texas Creative at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm assuming that means the advertising program, the creative track there. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is correct. And my title, Director of Texas Creative, is a new position. It's it's fallen to me and a lot of other faculty members that I have worked with in the past that the management and sort of shepherding of creative programs is often considered a service responsibility of a regular faculty member. And that can be very difficult to juggle, particularly if it's a portfolio program of any significant size. And as you might imagine. So, what's great about this role that I'm in now, it is a director position. My main responsibility is to run the program, and I also teach in the program as well. But this is a program of the size and scope that really needs a director.
Right.
And so uh, I'm thrilled to be, back at one of my academic alma maters, and
Right.
um, I love these students, and this institution is world class. So
You got your PhD from UT Austin. Is that correct?
I did.
Got it. You got the master, you got a bachelor's, you got a master's, you got a PhD. So you are qualified. You are ready to roll. What'd you do your thesis in?
My dissertation was about the creative process and how it's acquired and how it changes over time
Oh,
during
yeah.
during the process of acquisition as a student in particular. So I interviewed students at Ad Center up in Richmond
Mhm.
back when it was called Ad Center.
It's
Um,
Ukraine Center now.
Right. And a bunch of students here. And I did a sort of a longitudinal study and looked at how their process acquisition developed and changed. And it was really fascinating and enjoyed it immensely.
Glenn, we can talk. This could be a problem episode. We could be talking for hours. I find that so interesting. We're not even getting to AI and how that impacts the creative process. I'm sure you could probably write a whole other dissertation now, or you might be thinking about it, um, or maybe assigning that to somebody. Because do you think that process has already changed since generative AI has kind of hit the popularity that we've seen the past 6 to 12 months?
I I hope to God it hasn't changed people's process.
Yeah.
Because if so, if it's changing the way people think that they will forever be creative, how they will think, I think that's a huge loss. Um, but you and I both know it has definitely changed the way we execute and the way we
Yes.
strategize.
And we get worried. We were talking before. We're getting a little worried that it'll actually affect the process of coming up with the route to go.
Yeah,
Where I'm all in on the execution as well. Use the tools at your disposal. That's my personal view, but it shouldn't. You should get to that human centered idea. Um, maybe not having ChatGPT generate that.
absolutely. It's got to be organic.
Yeah. Well, that's something to think about, and we can definitely touch upon that. We've had on Professor John Murphy uh, on this show um, to talk a little bit about his tenure at UT Austin, just a short tenure there, and I can't wait to learn a little bit, maybe a recap of the Texas ad program. I've seen it in news and press and talked about within the community as one of those leading undergraduate institutions that does, in fact, produce portfolios, basically portfolios on par with the portfolio schools. I like that. My stance, put this in cement here, that this podcast is to combat students' need to go to portfolio schools. I worked at a portfolio school, not to say that they're evil. Some people have to go to them when they realize too late of what they want to study or what they want to do with their career. I get that. That's fine. But for those that know that they want to do advertising for a living early on in undergrad, That's the point of this podcast, is to prevent people from having to go there.
So here's the thing. You and I both know wonderful, terrific, talented people who went to portfolio schools. And, you know, people are going to find their path into the business. Um,
It's a great option. It works. It definitely
right.
works. Yeah,
And given that there are so few of us being university based portfolio programs, we wouldn't have the capacity to train everyone anyway. So I believe the portfolio schools serve a purpose for students who either realize after their undergraduate career that this is what they want to do, what they want to break into, um, or students who attended uh, a university that didn't have the capability to help them build a book.
yes.
Um, so the 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 issue with portfolio schools that I think is that they even realize is problematic for them today is that because of the cost associated with most portfolio schools, uh, they're not incredibly diverse and they are prohibitively expensive for most students. Um,
And they start to
and
produce this similar they're starting to produce similar perspectives, it seems like, that, or at least that's what I hear from recruiter standpoints.
right. And so that's an issue in a world where pretty much every recruitment professional that I meet with from any big agency brand tells me that the books they want to look at books from first minority students and other unrepresented, you know,
Backgrounds, yeah.
members of the community. And so, even at a place like Colorado Boulder, we had a diversity problem because it's overwhelmingly white. And, um, you know, that's largely a function of where they're located. Um, and just the demographics of the area. But there are great kids everywhere. There are super smart, super creative kids from every walk of life. I'm just so glad to be at a place here in Austin where the diversity has always been a part of what makes us great. Um, we have so many first generation students. We have so many kids from every race, every ethnicity, every background, and they come to the University of Texas because they are incredibly intelligent, incredibly academically gifted,
Of
but we
course.
also get some of the most creative, weird, wonderful minds that you've ever encountered. So,
I mean, it helps that the school has a great brand. It's in a
right.
great city, a great location. But it also helps that the program, advertising specifically, has such a great brand and presence within academia as well. But I'm curious now then, it seems like every school you touch, whether it be uh, Boulder, University of Alabama, Southern Methodist, these are all schools I have on my radar to either visit or have visited, uh, to talk to, because they have these established. I know Bama does, and I know SMU does. They have these established track systems. I'm seeing a little bit of a pattern. I'm not sure if Boulder does or not.
Boulder does.
Boulder does.
Yes.
Okay, Boulder does. These track systems, right? Whether it's account management, strategy, or purely creative art director, copywriter, it seems like there's these systems put in place at these schools you've touched. Are you at all a contributing factor in that, or is there just commonalities of where you go?
So, the reason I'm in this career and the reason I've become sort of a journeyman builder and leader of creative programs is all attributable to a spectacular woman named Deborah Morrison,
Oregon.
who is now at Oregon. And she was the leader of Texas Creative when I arrived here in 1999 to do my PhD.
I'm trying to
And
get her on this podcast for since I
oh, you
started
have
it.
to. You have
You got to
to.
help me out with that later.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah,
Um,
very great
but
things. So she
she
started that system kind of like at Texas back in the day.
I would call her one of the seminal founders of this program. There was
Okay.
also a man named Leonard Rubin, who actually back in 1979 started what the foundations of Texas Creative became.
Sure.
Um,
Good to know. I like this education history a lot. I
yeah,
have this
and
book actually.
so Deborah Morrison was here for 15 years. I think that's the right number. And I came in somewhere around the middle of that, and I guess maybe toward the last third of the her tenure
Okay.
here, and learned everything that I know about what makes a creative program successful, uh, what it looks like in terms of curriculum, the way that you stair step, um, the experience of building a book. I learned all that from her, and so my career has been all about um, going and spreading her gospel,
Okay.
and putting a little bit of my own spin on it too,
Right.
um, which she always encouraged me to do as well. But um, yeah, the program at SMU was a program that I pretty much uh, built from scratch. Um,
And that's not easy to do in academia.
it is not easy to do
It
because it's a
takes
whole new
years.
paradigm. It's a new
Why?
paradigm. Yeah. Well, because first of all, nothing's fast in academia.
I know. I know.
You have to wait and let some classes get through,
Right.
and to show proof of concept,
Yeah.
right? Um,
But wasn't the
but
proof of concept already at Texas?
oh, absolutely.
But
And
you
I had
needed to show proof that you could
and
do that at SMU.
that was what enabled me to go to other places with some credibility, right?
Right.
Because I just say I studied with Deborah Morrison, and they're like, oh, step right in.
Right.
Um, so so some places I was building from scratch and was able to prove to myself that I could do it without Deborah with
Hmm.
me, um, but always having her as the angel on my shoulder. And then at some places like Boulder, these were places where historically they had successful creative programs, and they needed someone to come back and sort of
Hmm.
reinvigorate or
You
re-energize
were
it.
their Dion.
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I don't know if I want to align myself with that analogy, but anyway,
Okay.
um, but and then, probably one of the greatest labors of love for me was being able to go back to the University of Alabama, which is where my undergrad and master's
Um,
degrees are from, and
yep.
Tuscaloosa is my hometown. So,
Oh, you
uh,
grew up.
yeah, and
Congrats on making the playoffs.
woohoo, roll tide, and hook 'em. So,
And hook 'em. Look at that.
yeah, see,
Maybe you got that good.
I'm a
You're
good
just
luck
good
charm
luck.
for college football. So, um, but going back to Alabama, I was able to build a portfolio program there, which hadn't been there when I was in undergrad. And so,
Minerva,
what a
right?
great opportunity to provide a way for kids there to do what I was not able to do as an undergraduate
Uh,
student. And I believe you've interviewed Mark Berry, the great
mm.
Mark Berry, brought him aboard. So thrilled to see that he's keeping that program, you know,
I was
going
just
strong.
there. I was just
Yeah.
there. They put me on the field and I talked. I sat in some on some of their concepting classes and spoke to their ad club.
Yep.
Mark Berry, yeah, he's doing a great job there. So
Yep.
shout out to Mark.
Yep.
And I'm talking to Mark Allen too about
Yeah.
visiting
Mark Allen is also
SMU.
great. I've had so many great Marks in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mark Allen is at SMU. He's um, leading the creative program at SMU. Um, so you've been going to these schools and either setting up or picking up the pieces of what might have been once there, kind of like a creative consultant in a way, and setting up these wonderful programs, teaching in them, I'm assuming. And are they all broken down? And is Texas currently broken down in the way that there's art directors and copywriters within the creative program and maybe designers as well?
So we definitely focus on art direction and copywriting.
The concept and coming up with the ideas
Right.
and focusing on craft for each of those.
Right. And the majority of our students, their desired trajectory is big agency, work for
Um,
big brands.
Good. I'm liking
Um,
that. I think that's great. I see it at University of Illinois. They're a little bit more. They're skewing slightly towards analytics, tech, Amazons of the world, and they're having Amazon come in. I'm sure you guys have that too on another portion of your track, where they'll have Amazon conduct a class or sponsor it, where they'll give like an internship, which is great
yep,
because who knows how long the creative agency world will last. But I still love that we're preparing students. You and I have very similar goals to help students break into an agency,
right,
preferably a big one with big brands, but any agency where you're
sure,
working on multiple clients is great within art direction, copywriting, account management strategy, the fundamentals, right?
sure. And a lot of our graduates, they'll go to a big agency, they'll work at several of them,
Yeah.
move around a little bit.
Yeah,
You
get
know how
experience.
that's how things work. You make a name for yourself somewhere and other people hire you away, and that's how you grow and get more money and better titles. And but a lot of them, eventually do end up in a Meta or a Apple
By
or
all means.
yeah,
Client side, yeah.
yeah.
You
And
go brand side.
yep,
Because it's not sustainable in an agency. Some people are cut out for 30 years agency life, be a CCO, be a president of an agency. By all means, do that. If you're
yeah,
cut out for it, you'll know very quick if you love it or if you're just doing it to get experience, which is fine too.
right,
But I always say break in first and then worry about that later.
right.
You know,
I think agencies are the proving ground, and
they just
then
it
when you
makes you
want the
so
better
ready.
dental plan and the better 401k, you find client side sometimes. So
Yeah, I mean, but the agency route to defend it, I mean, there's nothing like it for growing just who you are as a human and professionally. It teaches you so freaking much. They say you learn more in your first year of work than 4 years of college or whatever that might be. I think it's accelerated in the agency world because they put you through the fire. And this is kind of is a great segue, right? To like, how do you prepare for that? Because they don't teach you too much. Uh, they kind of expect you to get right into it, and that's what I worry about with these schools that do not have creative tracks for those that are looking for agency. That they are not prepared and they won't get hired because they can't prove in a portfolio or in a proof of concept of work that they can do this starting day one
yep.
or make it seem like they can. So, I guess with your career, you're doing just that. I guess what are some of those techniques in those classes? How are you making it so that students are ready when they graduate UT Austin or wherever you've gone, so they can get noticed by recruiters to show that they can do this job right when they start?
Well, I'm going to be, old fashioned and say, I think we equip them number one with the most durable skill, which is a great brain. They come to us with great brains. I should say we equip them with the best damn thinking strategies that they can master. Um, I think what we hear at Texas over and over again from people who hire our graduates and our students for internships and things like that is that, man, these books are smart. These books are well rounded. Um, they don't seem reductive. They don't seem to include a lot of this type of work that they see in a lot of student books. They instead see some really radically different approaches, some um, really interesting ways of thinking about strategies and brand building that are a little less familiar to them.
Yeah,
And so I think number one, we graduate great thinkers. But I would say too, you know, we don't we don't build divas.
that helps.
Um,
What do you mean by
there
that, though?
there are plenty of those people, right? And I think the creative part of our industry probably gets the worst rap when it comes to diva behavior. Um, I always I said this spontaneously at a South by Southwest talk several years ago, and it got
Mhm.
quoted on their feed. Um, I tell students, if you don't approach the advertising business with a sense of humility, it will be provided for you. Uh, and so I think those are true words, and I think that you can't be an asshole, right? You can't go into it thinking that you already know everything. You have to go in willing to learn and willing to make the most out of every job you have in terms of how it builds your career.
There was a student I talked to. Um, this person, when I asked them, "Are you an art director or copywriter?" This person said uh, something along the lines, "I'm both. I'm a unicorn." And I was like, "Okay, you you gotta learn some stuff." Um, and why I bring that up is for everybody listening. Humility is super important, like you said, and locking in on one route really well is much better than saying you can do both, because that tells me you probably can't do either effectively.
Right. Particularly as a junior, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Now, creative
I've had,
directors and CCOs, yes, after 10 years of agency experience, you will understand both sides a little bit better, but they still get consulting from their counterparts, and they still ask questions on if they're copywriter based from art directors, of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like the term hybrid or unicorn or whatever the term a student applies to it because,
I mean, how many
we
have you
know.
actually seen in your career? You've been in
Oh,
this setting. How many quote unquote unicorns have you actually come across? I'm sure it's not zero, but I'm sure it's not 1,000.
it's definitely not zero, and there are definitely kids that are dual threats for
Yeah.
sure,
Right.
but they are rare, and even those kids, I would say, don't market yourself that
Right.
way,
Right.
right?
I was just about to say that. Even if you are, it's still better to go in with one route.
Right, because they don't know that about you yet. Let them, tell them what you are, tell them what kind of
Show
job
them.
you want,
Yeah.
and let them hire you, and then let them discover that you're a double threat, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, actually, it'll probably come up naturally in an interview. If I see your portfolio, because I do this and I look at portfolios quite a bit when I'm talking to students and hiring for our internship at Havas, Chicago, and New York, people should reach out to me. I will ask them, are you a copywriter, art director? Did anybody help you with this campaign? What was their role in that? And then if you told me honestly that you did it all, then I know right there that you might be a unicorn.
Right.
Right? It'll come out naturally, but it's better not to say, I do everything really well, right? Of course. So I think that's a really good touch point on humility. And while we're talking about all these things that UT does so well and how you prepare them, they can be taking notes and applying this to their own personal break-in journeys. So I
Sure.
like that we're touching upon this. I mean, you've helped so many students, I guess, break into this industry at some large agencies. Are there any tangible tips that you kind of give out that you find yourself repeating day in and day out when you're talking with your students that we can talk about now on this podcast?
You mean in terms of making connections to get jobs or
Either within the creative process, which you have your dissertation on, either on networking and the fundamentals of breaking in, because not everybody's going to have UT Austin on their resume or their
right.
portfolio. So I would love to hear just kind of like what are some of these tips that you've discovered over your career that you directly help students break into?
Well, from a process standpoint, I've done a lot of research on it. Um, Deborah Morrison and I wrote a book about process.
What's it called?
It's called The Creative Process Illustrated. It was published back in 2010
Okay.
when the Earth was still cooling. And it seems like a million years ago now, but it was such a fun project. We got to spend entire days with people like David Kennedy and Dan Wyden
There we go.
you know, uh, and meet people, and talk to people that were just so fascinating and so interesting about how they get to ideas. But I always tell my students, and it was borne out by all the research we've ever done and all the interviews and note taking we've done over the years. Um, everyone's process is distinctive and unique, but everyone's process also has similarities to everyone else's. Um, you know, the way that you get to ideas as an individual is going to be different than the way someone else does, but no one works in a vacuum in this business. We work as partners, we work as teams. So as soon as you think you've got your process figured out, your next big step is to figure out how that process dovetails with other people's and how
Uh,
you can successfully navigate that. And you don't always work with the same people on every project. So
no, you
it's a
don't.
constant reiterative process, right? Um,
So
so
it
there's
starts
that.
out with knowing yours.
Yeah. You have to know yours. It's just like being a musician. That's your instrument, right? Um,
What's the James Webb approach? Isn't that a famous one?
yeah, preparation, incubation, elimination, verification. Yeah.
I knew you would know it, Glenn.
It's that so many people have talked about process. So many people have opined about it, but not a lot of research has been done on it. And so that's probably the proudest contribution that I think I've made in as an academic. Um, and by the
Find
way,
you.
my parents still think it's hilarious that I'm an academic because I was a terrible student.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, I mean, I went to Alabama, I had fun, I partied, I was a solid C student. But then when I discovered really what I wanted to do, it
Right.
was no one could stop me, in terms of being successful in
Did you
my
did
classes.
you when you figured out what you wanted to do to break into academia, I'm
Yeah.
assuming?
Well, I never thought I'd be in academia. I worked in the industry for several years, and then I was asked to come and teach
What
at
wh-
Alabama.
how'd you would you where did you work? Because I'm not seeing that on your LinkedIn.
I worked client side for a big financial services company in Birmingham.
And you're doing
Um,
marketing?
yeah, sort of an in-house agency
Oh,
type of
nice.
environment. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And but that was what I could get without a book from a portfolio school. Um and I loved it and thought I was pretty good at it and everything like that. And I thought that, that was going to be my trajectory, is working client side and, making the most out of that. And then when I unexpectedly got the opportunity to interview for a job as an instructor at the University of Alabama, I was sort of reticent about even interviewing for it because I was happy doing what I was doing. And my creative director at the time said, "Well, why don't you go interview for it? And if you want to do it for a semester, and I won't replace you, and you can come back if you hate
This
it."
is what happened to Steve Jobs.
Well, wow. Um,
You're like Steve Jobs.
yeah, I would
No.
never. Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just messing.
but
But no, I don't see that happening very often or in a world today where a creative director or somebody would be like, yeah, go take this other job, try it out. And then if you don't like it, we'll have you hire you right back. I don't know. We see boomerangs quite a bit,
yeah,
but I don't know about if I've heard that too much on this podcast with 250 break-in stories. So that is
I was
interesting.
just incredibly fortunate, right? He was just a nice guy, and he
That's a
knew.
good lead.
I'm sorry.
He's a good leader, a good boss. That
He is,
gentleman
and
or woman.
I don't even know if he's still working, but that man, he saw the sort of wrestling I was doing with the decision. And
Because you didn't hate that job, you were
no,
saying,
no, I liked it.
and you were probably good
Um,
at it, so he
I
probably
liked
wanted
it.
you
I
to
was good
come
enough
back,
at it,
but
right? And so he was kind enough to offer me that escape hatch.
and
Um,
it's a safe one too.
yeah,
You had you it was a perfect opportunity that you could try it out, and if you didn't like and this I'm assuming that was this for an adjunct role, or was this
it was
for
for a full-time instructor job. Yeah,
okay, and you
and
had your master's already?
I did. So that's why they called me.
Gotcha.
I was low-hanging fruit, 45
Right.
minutes
You were
away. Right.
qualified. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I had been a TA and stuff like that, so I had some experience with teaching, but I never thought I would teach
Why'd you
as
get
a
your
career.
master's in the first place?
The economy and the Gulf War.
That's a a really common answer with
Yeah,
we saw that in 2020 when the
yeah,
economy goes down, higher education
yeah,
skyrockets because
yeah.
people can't
It
find
was
jobs. And I
the
think that's
safe haven of higher education. There were no jobs. The jobs that there were not great, and so I hid from the job market for 2 years and did a master's. It turned out to be great. I really loved it too.
I
So,
recommend that. I think that's a really safe like because if you want, I want to end up teaching one day. I wish I would have done it in 2020 or just got it right out of the way. And while I was still living at home, I was already in school mode, and now I'm doing it 3, 4 years later, and it's fine because they have online programs now, and they make it pretty simple to balance out. So I think that's a great option for those that are struggling to find jobs, whether it's portfolio school or if you're not portfolio school like route, you can get a master's. A lot of these schools have these plus ones, like just to have that piece of paper. And that's why I get mad at portfolio schools. I worked at one and I've seen it that some of them, most of them don't offer that tangible accredited degree in the master's.
right,
Uh,
right.
so if you're going to do any higher education, make sure you're getting that piece of paper, right?
Absolutely. It's too much money and too much time not to have that credential under your
Right.
belt.
So then you had that, and then you loved it, and then what? And then it was like serendipitous. Was that the word?
Serendipitous moment for sure.
Serendipitous.
Yeah. I went and taught for a semester. I really enjoyed it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I had days where like I asked myself what I had done, Um,
Pay cut.
but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
But
life was probably less stressful, more fulfilling,
yeah, it was stressful in different ways, right? But it was definitely more fulfilling for sure. And
which
I
helps
really enjoyed it. And I taught for 3 years as an instructor. And then some of my PhD level colleagues said, well, if you're going to keep doing this, you should get a PhD because that's,
to get tenured.
yeah, that's the coin of the realm. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so a couple of them were Texas grads, and they said you should really go to Texas because it's the
which is
best program.
basically one of maybe 3, 4 higher ed institutions that offers a advertising PhD. Very few have it that specialized.
I don't know about now, but at the time it was the only advertising PhD in the
Michigan
world.
State, I think Michigan State has one, but you just need a PhD, right?
Yeah,
You
I
didn't
mean,
need
if
it
you're going to do
specifically,
this for the long haul, yeah, some kind of terminal degree, an
but it
MFA
didn't
or
have to
PhD.
necessarily. It could have been in comms. It could have been in marketing. I don't know if they
Could have
have
been,
those.
yeah. But we talked about unicorns a few minutes ago. Here I was a creative, even a client side creative, entering a PhD program, and nobody in PhD programs was interested in creative or researching it.
I know. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
they were much more the, you know, quantitative media effectiveness, all that kind of stuff. And
So you basically you set yourself apart of that pool to be this creative track professor for the
I
long
didn't
haul.
know I was doing it at the time. I thought I would
Right.
come in here and everybody be talking about creativity because that's what our business is fueled by, right? But it turns out nobody was researching creativity.
Right.
Nobody was interested in teaching it. Everybody wanted to teach more of the business side stuff in my program. And
Hmm.
so when I met Deborah, who, was a PhD who was teaching and researching and creativity, I met my, touchstone.
Right.
And and I think she saw in me a way to have a protege, have somebody to mentor, and we just got along great from
You
minute.
think you needed the PhD to do all this looking back?
I think so because
Bureaucracy within
a lot of
higher ed.
a lot of people who teach creative at colleges and universities are people from industry who typically have a bachelor's degree and sometimes have a master's.
But
But
also like 30 years of experience.
yeah, and
Right.
while I didn't have that credential from a big agency or something like that, having a PhD is also a great advantage in any academic environment, especially if you're running a program, because you know how to speak academia, you know how to speak to that bureaucracy, you know how to advocate for resources, and lecturers and instructors, number one, they don't get paid enough to worry about all that stuff. But number two, they don't really know how to navigate all that territory. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
if you're going to run a program of any kind, you have to know who the people are to ask for what you need and how to advocate for it.
Okay. We're kind of digressing
Yeah.
to our audience here, but I think I find that interesting.
Yeah.
But it also, the lesson there is, some of these opportunities that you take, you don't realize that you're, setting yourself up for a future. So I always like with this podcast as well. I didn't understand that at the time when I was talking to ad trade journalists such as Tim Nudd, Allison Weisbrot, or Olivia Morley at Adweek, just because I was looking for the next guest every week, I held myself with discipline to do every week. I didn't realize that I was shaping out the perfect career with this podcast as a comms coordinator for an agency.
Yeah.
So sometimes, just picking a route that is in that North Star direction, you went off the inkling that opportunity came. You probably realized that you would see yourself in the classroom. You took that next step in that right direction. And I always recommend students to take that next step, that North Star, whether that's copywriting, art direction, strategy, production, account management, pick a route within that area and find opportunities that get you closer, whether it's directly planned or not. So I
Yep.
think that's great, Glenn. Is there any other advice, anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to mention before we sign off?
I would just say to your listeners, be aware that everyone you meet, all of your professors, hell, your colleagues in your classes,
Yeah.
um, your every interaction you have in your academic career is part of you building your reputation. And what I mean by that is you're building a reputation that will have a great impact on whether or not later on, when you need people to help you, whether or not they're going to be willing to.
So true. It's a small industry. Small.
And what I found and what I've been so gratified to see, like you said, I've been at several different big state universities doing this portfolio thing. And what's so cool is that any student I've taught at any institution, at any of the different portfolio programs that I've those kids, when they get out into the world, it doesn't matter if it's a student I taught at Alabama working in New York looking for a junior, that they want any kid that I taught. You know what I mean? They want to help any kid that I've taught anywhere. Um, so that personal network is so valuable to all of us that you really need to make sure that you never burn bridges. You're always going to bump back into people, and you need to pay it forward, right? People will give you a hand up and help you find your place in the business, but it's your responsibility to do the same thing when your time comes.
Love it, Glenn. How can people reach out to you if they have any other questions or want to learn more, maybe transfer schools?
LinkedIn is always good. Probably the easiest way to find me, Glenn Griffin, two N's on the Glenn. Um, and yeah, love to hear from people.
Great episode, great advice. I appreciate you, Glenn. I'm sure the listeners do as well.
Thanks, Gino.
Take care.